Manufacturing production improved more than expected in September. Stats SA data shows manufacturing increased by 8% in September compared to the same time last year. Economists had expected manufacturing to moderate to 1.9%. Now, Stats SA says the increase in the manufacturing output figure is a result of higher production in the motor vehicles, parts and accessories sector. Well, at the same time, remember, in September 2013, production in the automotive sector was adversely affected by industrial action. The food and beverages division was also a large positive contributor to the year-on-year increase. Now, in the month before this latest reported figure, manufacturing production decreased by 1.2%. That's in August compared to August last year. 5 of the 10 manufacturing divisions reported negative growth rates over this period. Well, Thabi Leoka from Renaissance Capital joins me now to talk about this latest manufacturing output figure. Thabi, as always, thanks indeed for coming in.
It's a pleasure, Devin.
All right, so we've got a very subdued forecast in terms of economic growth for the country, 1.4%. So we tend to look at these figures, at manufacturing output figures, to see if we can make a positive contribution to that overall economic growth figure. 8%, what do you make of it? Should we get happy?
8% is just a normalization. Remember that we had strikes last year, this time in the auto sector. So it's really base effects. But what we're also seeing in terms of, even the PMI, what the PMI are also saying is that we are recovering from the strikes that we had this year as well. And I include not only the manufacturing strikes, but also the mining strikes, because the two sectors complement each other. So within manufacturing, you have basic iron and steel, non-ferrous metals, and without that supply to the manufacturing sector, because of the mining strike, the manufacturing sector is affected.
You want to tend to look at something positive in there and see that, maybe we can get some hope for that big figure. I see food and beverages, that really did well this time around. Some positivity there?
So, positive, and I also think that it's also part of the normalization, but also food prices have been quite subdued,
Yeah.
And we're starting to see an increase in production, at least in the manufacturing. And I also think that maybe the rand has an effect on imported food products, which is very prominent in our manufacturing production. So maybe it's a factor of exports from South Africa into our neighboring country being greater than the imports that we have from outside South Africa, outside Africa actually.
And you speak to manufacturing managers and they tell you, well, the Africa that you speak about, I mean, that's the destination that we need to really concentrate on to get our goods there. Because really speaking, Europe, still not out of the woods yet, and it's still hanging over us in terms of what we sell to them, is it not?
That is very true, and that's why I'm not very excited about the number. But the positive thing about this number is that it actually, so the contribution to GDP from manufacturing will be slightly more positive than last quarter's deduction. Yep. In the manufacturing sector. So that's a good thing. The other thing is, you're right that Europe is still underperforming. Most of our exports, manufacturing exports, still go to Europe, and without Europe recovering, South Africa's GDP will still become pedestrian. With the manufacturing circle, which is a body that looks at manufacturing performance and companies in South Africa, has also said that the sector has actually been supported by demand from the region, and that is a good sign. And hopefully that the more the rest of the continent increases, grows, the more we have a thriving middle class, the more our sector will perform better.
All right, that's the demand element, but you speak to manufacturers and they tell you possibly more of a concern is this uncertainty in energy, for example, electricity.
Definitely.
I mean, that's hanging over the sector. It doesn't help to see that the utility that supplies this electricity to the manufacturers have been downgraded now. So it makes
Definitely.
their borrowings more expensive. How do you think the situation with Eskom will affect manufacturers?
Adversely. Firstly, electricity prices are increasing next year. It'll have a negative impact on manufacturing and our big industries, not only manufacturing but mining. And also we had disruptions in water supply as well. So all the inputs or utilities becoming not only inconsistent but also very expensive. And a lot of manufacturing firms either have to load shed or also, or many of them, the smaller ones especially, have to shut down because it's just becoming increasingly expensive. And on top of that, labor, after the strikes, the increase in wages, we've seen also losses, job losses in the sector, and that has put a lot of pressure on not only the economy in terms of employment, but we're also seeing this is an impact. This is a result of squeezed margins in manufacturing sector and manufacturing companies.
Yep. Just going forward, while we're on Eskom, I mean, do you see anything changing significantly in the months to come, given the downgrade that they've just had?
The downgrade has been, it's debilitating, to say the least. Firstly, Eskom's outstanding debt is about 255 billion rands, and this makes the downgrade makes Eskom's ability to fund this shortfall very difficult. Looking forward, Eskom still needs to raise funds for its projects, for both Kusile and Medupi, and other future projects that it wants to pursue. And that just means that with the government saying that, look, we're not funding any SOEs from the budget, the government has promised Eskom an early supply of about 20 billion rands, but that's not going to come from budget. It will come from the selling of non-core assets. What that means is that the government has to sell its assets from your Vodacoms or your Telcoms, and it also has assets in companies like Kumba, but it also needs a buyer for it to sell, and that puts pressure on some of the SOEs that are in trouble, especially Eskom.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thabi Leoka from Renaissance Capital, thanks indeed.
It's a pleasure.